up to introduce our guest speaker today. She is a senior fellow at Hudson Institute and the director of its Keystone Defense Initiative. Heinrichs, Dr. Heinrichs, specializes in U.S. national defense policy with a focus on strategic deterrence. Dr. Heinrichs currently serves as a commissioner on the Bipartisan Strategic Posture Commission, which was created in fiscal year 2022, their National Defense Authorization Act. She also serves on the U.S. Strategic Command Advisory Group and the National Independent Panel on Military Service and Readiness. She's an adjunct professor at the Institute of World Politics, where she teaches nuclear deterrence theory, and is also contributing editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy.
Thank you.
Dr. Heinrichs earned her doctorate in Defense and Strategic Studies from Missouri State University, where she graduated with distinction. She received her master's in National Security and Strategic Studies from the U.S. Naval War College and graduated also with highest distinction, and there from its College of Naval Command and Staff, receiving the Director's Award for Academic Excellence. She earned her BA in History and Poli-Sci from Ashland University in Ohio and was an Ashbrook Scholar. She currently serves as a member of their Board of Trustees. Interviewing Dr. Heinrichs today are two of our members, Ambassador Jackie Wolcott and Dr. Charles Kupperman, both experts on national security. And on a personal note, when we asked Dr. Heinrichs to come into town the night before so that we could have some personal time with her, she emailed me, unfortunately, due to my upcoming Senate confirmation, hosting NATO events, and her household of 5 children, she couldn't make it. But we are so thrilled that she's here with us today and honored to have the time to listen to her speak on new Cold War threats from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So today we give you Dr. Rebecca Heinrichs, along with Dr. Wolcott and Dr. Kupperman.
Okay. Everyone here? Yes. We have one administrative announcement to make here. This is a teleprompter-free zone. So, I'll be come back.
This is a big girl Q&A.
Exactly right. Delighted to have our guest. I've known her a long time, friend, colleague, fellow expert in national security. I'd like to start by asking her how you started at Hudson and what this little initiative is about.
Well, thank you all for being here. I always enjoy coming to these and seeing how active people are in their communities. I mean, I do lots of work on trying to keep our country safe from the external threats that have infiltrated into our country, but all of the work that you do in all of your various locations is incredibly important. It takes a whole American enterprise to do this American experience and freedom, so thank you all for the work that you do. So I grew up in a small town here, but it's going to sound like I'm taking a long time to tell this, but it's going to be really short actually. I was a freshman in college when 9/11 happened. And it was then that I decided that I wanted to go into national security policy. And so that's what set me on the trajectory to continue to study. And I thought at the time, as bad as 9/11 was, it was horrific, terrible, but the threats to our country can be a lot worse. And the gravest threats are from major powers with large nuclear arsenals. And so then my area of focus of study and research and analysis really narrowed on Cold War doctrine and how Ronald Reagan led us through the Cold War safely. And so then that's been my commitment of my work in that particular professional vocation. So used to work on Capitol Hill and then continued my education, and then now I'm at Hudson Institute, which is a conservative internationalist think tank committed to American global leadership for freedom, prosperity, and security for ourselves and our allies. And so what I do at Hudson is I focus on how the United States can work in the world to maximize the security of Americans and can increase our ability or opportunity to have prosperity, stability for ourselves and our posterity. And I am the director of our Keystone Defense Initiative. And what that is it's an educational institution within Hudson that seeks to educate policymakers and amplify the good analysis and work that's happening across in our ally think tank world, and then also in Washington, D.C. and across the country in universities that say good things and do good things, so that I can put them all in one spot. And actually, I get very impatient with policymakers to actually implement good policy rather than just know it. And so my work is designed specifically to communicate that well to make sure that we get this work implemented.
One follow-up, which wasn't mentioned in her introduction, but she is having a book coming out. And could you comment a bit on that book and the release date?
Sure. I continued my education as I was being married and having children, and I have now 5 children: Charlotte, Howard, Catherine, Rosemary, and John. And I had finished up my master's degree and thought I was done getting formal education. And then I started co-teaching a class at Missouri State on nuclear deterrence, and my professor said, well, I was teaching doctoral students, and he said, you really should get your doctorate if you're teaching doctoral students. And so I went ahead and enrolled in the course, and what I was really motivated to do was to write about how America's nuclear deterrence, how we think about our nuclear weapons, how we've thought about them since the Cold War, and how we seek to use them to deter the worst kinds of aggression, and then to carry out a strategy to win if deterrence fails, and to do it in a way that is consistent with American principles and values. And that this is an argument that we as Americans are going to have to grapple with again, just like the Americans grappled with it during the Cold War when Ronald Reagan was seeking to create and really beforehand Nixon, to create a nuclear deterrence strategy that would be credible, that would deter the Soviets, and that would be in line with American principles. And I think we got to do it again. We're going to go through it again because now we have China and Russia, 2 major nuclear powers that are seeking to supplant the United States. And so I wanted to get ahead of the argument that the moral response is that we should get rid of our nuclear weapons, and disagree with that fundamentally. And so my doctoral thesis explains very carefully, looking at Cold War documents and then up until today, that we actually think very carefully about this and seek to create an American nuclear deterrent that is credible, so our adversaries don't test us, and is in line with our principles. And so that's what my book is about, is the short answer. And that's my doctoral thesis. And so I just got the final proof of the edits, and so I have to go through and approve those, and we're going to be out in the next, I think, 7 weeks.
Bravo.
The name of the book is Duty to Deter, American Nuclear Deterrence in the Just War Doc.
Thank you. We've started in, and you're ahead of our questions. You have sort of started to characterize the international situation we find ourselves in. We have Putin, Xi, Ayatollah, Kim Jong-un continuing to strengthen their defense and economic relationships and work around sanctions. And I wonder if you have ideas, options available to the West to disrupt these relationships.
Well, this is the fundamental question. So, I think, everyday Americans who are busy doing the work of Americans, taking care of their families, running their businesses, they expect that there are people in Washington who can see the threats accurately and are coming up with solutions to take care of them. And so sometimes it can be really confusing. You turn on the TV and think, okay, what is going on? And what do these threats all have in common? It seems like things are getting worse. Depending on what news channel you watch, you'll get a better picture of that. But they are getting worse. And there's the phenomenon that we're witnessing is really, I really do think it's a new axis of authoritarians. And it's led by, you think about it, try to explain to people, you think about the globe and the countries that have the greatest capabilities in their military and in their economies are the countries that can assert their will on the world more effectively. And so you can see that's where the power centers are. And right now, China is contesting the United States. It wants to be the preeminent power, and then it wants to influence the world towards outcomes that benefit the Chinese Communist Party, rooted in Marxist-Leninist ideology. And the world that I grew up in since the Cold War has been one dominated by the United States. And not that everywhere across the world is like the United States, but we have been the power that has been the most influential, with a system of allies that are collaborating with the United States. And that's conducive to American security and prosperity here at home. And so now what we're seeing is our adversaries are betting on American decline. They're betting on American decline because they're looking at it, they think that we're economically a mess. We just talked about the threat from our national debt. I think Senator Rick Scott is leading the effort to get members of Congress to understand that this is a real national security priority and a threat. It's not an abstract concept, it's real. He's right about that. And they see a very divided country. They see an American military that we've not invested in to handle peer threats since the Cold War. He's dividend. We've been focused on the global war on terror, which was an important problem, but it was not the greatest problem. It was the rise of the Chinese Communist Party collaborating with their other adversaries. And so now you see the rise of China. And though China is a very different country than the Russian Federation led by Vladimir Putin, a thug that seeks to supplant the United States and Europe as the most powerful country. And then you have the North Koreans, led by Xi Jinping, who sees himself as a god, and his people, he's a totalitarian dictator, and his people that see him as a god. And then you have the Ayatollahs in Iran. And so all of these are very, very different countries, very different cultures, very different countries, very different specific objectives in the way they carry them out, but they are increasingly collaborating because they have one shared objective, and that is to make us unsafe. It is to make the United States less powerful, to make our influence less effective, and to fundamentally break the credibility of the U.S. alliance architecture. So the first step is to recognize that, because our politicians still only think that there's this one problem over here, and it's unrelated to that problem over there, and unrelated. You cannot come up with a grand strategy to take on these problems. So that's the first thing you gotta do. And the next thing you gotta do is you gotta try to make sure that we are not enriching our adversaries, which is still what we're doing with so much of our trade with China. So you seek not to enrich your adversaries, you become global, you become energy not just independent, but you become energy dominant, so that you're not reliant on the same things that they need to become rich. So those are some things that you can do, and then you look to make sure that your technology is not reliant on their technology, so that we don't just essentially become a place where the Chinese Communist Party can take all of our information, data, and use it in for their own benefit. But then fundamentally, you have to have a military that is strong, robust, incredible, and incredibly threaten our adversaries, so they understand we do not want war, but we will bring it to you if you insist upon aggressing upon the American people. And so that's kind of a snapshot, and then obviously you need American leaders who understand how to exercise American statecraft. We can get into that.
Okay. Well, could you give us some observations based on NATO and what you just saw this week, and your assessment of our role in NATO and whether we're being taken as seriously as we should be?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So this is what first let me start off with just my fundamental assumptions, just so you can understand where I'm coming from. The threats are so big against the United States right now, we cannot take care of them without allies. That's just a reality. If we try to turn inward and do this ourselves, we are toast. We're toast. Now you might say, okay, but our allies aren't doing that great. Okay, well then you need somebody in there to help them get strong and help us. But the answer cannot be that we turn our back on our allies and say, figure it out on your own. The world will become far more unstable, far more dangerous for our children. I do not want my 5 children and my grandchildren to grow up in a world in which the Chinese Communist Party is the dominant country in the world, collaborating with the Russian Federation. Although I think once China, if they are able to supplant the United States, you'll probably see China and Russia at each other's throats too, but that's a dangerous environment too. So that's where I start from. Okay, so weak allies are dangerous allies. Strong allies are an enormous benefit to the United States. And what I mean by that is there's geography that's helpful for the United States to be able to do things like refueling for some of our military weapon systems that we need. But you've got some countries that have great, they've been doing better work than us in some ways, and their shipbuilding might be better than ours, and so we want to be able to take advantage of that and collaborate because time is not on our side. We have had politicians that have thought that if we could just bring China into the global economy, and if we could just insist that Russia was going to be our friend, that it would be, and these were fundamentally wrong assumptions. We thought that if China got rich, it would become liberal. Instead, China got rich and it's still communist. And so we need our allies. So we do have good and willing partners across the Atlantic who want the United States to lead. They're desperate for it. They really are. When I talk to the Poles, I talk to the Brits, I talk to the Australians, I talk to the Lithuanians. The Baltic countries are awesome. The Estonians, the Latvians, these are people who understand fascism, they understand communism, they want no part of either one. They do not want to be subjugated. They love the United States that they see and Top Gun 2. And that's what they want, right? That's what they want. And they really kind of have an attitude of they've got pride in their own countries, where a lot of them are still thinking about Ukraine. We beat up on some of these countries for not having the same degree of anti-corruption practices and rule of law, etc. Some of these are baby democracies. They've only been democracies, they're like, 35 years. Not the exercise of self-government are muscles you have to develop and grow and exercise. They want to be part of the West, they want the United States to lead. So, that being said, some of the countries in NATO have understood the threat of Russia. They understand, the Trump administration, which Charlie served so well in, is that they worked really hard to make sure that our European allies could get off of Russian energy. And so they opposed the development of Nord Stream 2, that undersea pipeline that would go from Russia to Germany. And that was something that the Baltic countries and Poland were very adamant on. The Biden administration didn't enforce those sanctions, and so Nord Stream 2 got went through. Okay, so now these allies, most of them are contributing their 2% minimum of GDP for defense. They are doing it. In countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, I'd love to point out, these are small countries punching way above their weight. They've essentially emptied their shells for Ukraine, their shells of all of their weapons to get into Ukraine, understanding that if Ukraine falls, they're next. And they totally see that with their eyes. And now they're rebuilding their defense industrial bases, but it takes time. And they're looking at American leadership. And if the United States isn't going to have skin in the game, they're going to start looking around. Because they cannot possibly rely on the Germans. They cannot rely on the French. It takes American leadership. And people say, okay, well then why not? If this is in their backyard, let them take care of it. Because my security and prosperity and the security and prosperity of my kids relies on a Europe that's at peace. And we need the Europeans to help with our, I don't want to call it a trade war, but a lot of it is a trade war. But a lot of the economic warfare that we want to do against the Chinese, you've got to have the Europeans with you. But the Europeans can't be with us if they're at war. So in sum, we have allies that are looking for American leadership. In fact, they're starved for it, and they're not getting it right now. And it's going to take some tough love for some of these guys. And for others, they're totally willing to do it, but they have to have some direction so that we're pulling in the same direction.
What did you find at the NATO summit, and what do you think we can do about the situation in Ukraine, which goes on and on?
Okay, so this is a great question, and this is one that'll get me fired. I haven't been fired up yet. So here's the thing. The way the United States has thought about keeping the peace here at home since the Cold War is that if our allies are attacked, we want to help our allies success. First of all, we don't want our allies to be attacked. We want successful deterrence, so that President Trump likes to say, when people ask me about Ukraine, well, the first thing he says is it didn't happen on my watch, and it wouldn't happen on my watch. Which implied in that is it's a bad thing, and we don't want it to have happened. And Ukraine is the good guy, relatively speaking in rough terms, and Russia is the bad actor, and Russia really does seek to make the United States a degraded power, not influential in Europe. And so it's going after a country that's not a member of NATO to see if they can splinter the NATO alliance and let Ukraine get subjugated, and then they'll seek to pick off the smaller countries. And that's Russia's goals. And so what I said from the very beginning, you can go back and see it, because people say, oh, hindsight is easier. Like, well, no, we were saying it at the time. First, you have to credibly deter the Russians. Deterrence failed. Russia invades Ukraine. Then the next thing you have to do is seek to help you get a clear strategy, so you have a clear idea of your outcome, and then you get a strategy, and then you resource the strategy for victory. What you don't do is tell the world what the United States is not going to do to help its ally with an open-ended outcome, with restrictions on the Ukrainians, so they can't hit that target, can't use these weapons, can't use these weapons. The Biden administration has essentially set up Ukraine for a long, protracted war of attrition, which they will lose. And that has been true from the very beginning. The media narrative that the Biden administration is standing up to autocracy and defending democracy by his Ukraine strategy is a myth. And so what the alliance should do, what I said from the Brits, the Poles, and the Baltic countries from the beginning has said, help Ukraine get the weapons that they need, let them hit the targets they need, so that Putin understands that the calculations are not good for him, and he's got to stop it. And those countries have wanted to do that, and it's been the United States with the Germans that have said that they've been risk averse and nervous Nancy the whole time. And so my recommendation has been a total pivot so that you actually help Ukraine win, get to the end of this war on terms that favor Ukraine, so they're a sovereign nation, and then bolster the military defenses of the eastern, it's really NATO's front now, the Baltic countries and Poland, so that Russia doesn't seek to try to do this again.
So we start connecting some of these international dots. The withdrawal from Afghanistan led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, led to the Iranians thinking they had something going on with Hamas and their ring of fire strategy around Israel, as well as the war in the Red Sea. And it is a war, and the shipping changes at ports is a major drag on the economy. How do we start breaking through these dots?
So the first thing he said is so important to understand. So people write this off as kind of like a partisan attack, that it was the precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan that led to this cascade of aggression. But in fact, it's just historically what happened. Okay, because these countries, I mean, this is they can see exactly what's happening, and they want. All of these adversaries, they do not believe that that their national interests, as they see them, they're authoritarian countries, so they've got different ideologies, they have been served when the United States is strong, and in our version of how people should behave. International waters are for everybody. China's claims in the South and East China Sea is erroneous. It's wrong. I don't care how close it is to them. The international waters don't belong to them. The outer space does not belong to them. We share these things because the world is only so big. And the global economy relies on these things, and so it's really been defended by the American military. Okay, so the fact that these two-bit Iranian proxy Houthis have been able to shut down the Red Sea from trade. They've essentially closed down trade. The United States Navy is being shoved out of the Red Sea by terrorist proxies. It does not have to be that way. It does not have to be that way. Ronald Reagan destroyed the Iranian Navy for far less offense. just for even sniffing at the possibility of creating a dangerous Operation Praying Mantis, 1982. And so you can see how far back the United States has even retreated, and what we're even willing to do to defend our own interests. And this began with America's precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan. That was a national humiliation. It was, and we could go on with the specific political, and it was these were political decisions. President of the United States decided the United States would get out of Afghanistan, and then he went away from the media cameras and did not answer the phone when Boris Johnson called him, and just stayed away from the cameras while you saw everything that was horrible on the TV with Afghans hanging from military aircraft and trying to get out of there, American citizens still stuck there. I was helping, as many Americans were, trying to get Americans, Christian missionaries who were in there and were caught off by surprise, trying to get them out, trying to get them inside the perimeter, which the Biden administration outsourced the security of the perimeter to the Taliban. And then the Bagram Air Force Base, largest, huge, massive military base that had a prison full of Al-Qaeda and ISIS prisoners, opened it up when the Taliban came in. And one of those prisoners that was a member of ISIS that was in that base, the Bagram Air Force Base, was the one that killed those 13 American service members who were helping with the evacuation. This is a series of political decisions. Do not let anybody tell you that this is just the way it had to be to get out of Afghanistan. That's not true. And by the way, for an administration that loves to brag about how he's been this great defender of NATO, that was a NATO mission. You would not believe the earful I caught from NATO embassies that came in to talk to me at Hudson about how shocked they were by the American government's behavior on a NATO mission in Afghanistan that way, and they did not communicate to their heads of state. So that has a real effect. And so it's been since that you've now seen adversaries on the march and really looking and poking and prodding to see where the United States is not going to exact a pain. I mean, what this is when an adversary does something against your interest, you have to have a pain response against them so they don't do it more. It's actually very simple for anybody who's parented. I don't mean to say that it's easy in real life to do, but it's fairly simple in terms of human nature and how you respond. But if you believe that it's been the United States that has been provocative, it's the United States that's been a bully, it's the United States that's done these things, then if your response is, okay, fine, we'll get out of the Red Sea. Okay, fine, we'll get out of Afghanistan. Okay, fine, we'll get out of Niger, which is after Afghanistan, we had anti-terrorism operations out of Niger. That was, the Biden administration said we've got an over-the-horizon capability to see terrorists regrouping in the Middle East, don't worry. And then a lot of the activity of the special forces were operating out of Niger. Well, guess what? The Russian Wagner group has pushed U.S. forces now out of Niger. Just because we're now focused on China and Russia doesn't mean the terrorist threat has gone away. It just means everything else is so much worse in comparison. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I like that response.
So speaking of deterrence, we seem to have fallen behind Russia and China in our nuclear deterrence and capabilities, and China's building up. You're on the Nuclear Posture Commission. What should we be doing that we're not doing?
Yeah. So people often ask me, why in the world did I decide to study nuclear deterrence as my area of focus? And really the simple reason is 9/11 happened, I said, my freshman year of college, which really left an impact on me in terms of, that's a time, very formative time in a person's life, freshman in college. And I was at the Ashworth Scholar Program at Liberal Arts University in small town Ohio, which is like Hillsdale College, for those of you who are familiar with that. So focus on the American founding, focus on American civilization, the great books that formed the way our founders thought about what was right and good and how to form good government. And so it was the confluence of my learning about that and falling in love with why America is so great. I mean, I had great parents and all that good stuff too. But I'm just saying, like, my patriotism truly became informed at the time that it was attacked by a people who hate us, Al-Qaeda. And so then I thought, well, gosh, who though that was bad, 9/11 was terrible, but
nuclear weapons are really the sort of the power center that can really end the
American experiment. And so that's why my focus was there. So when I think about American nuclear deterrence, that is stripped away from all euphemisms. Got our American military and everything great that our Navy, our Air Force, Marine Corps, and Space Force does. But fundamentally, it's the keystone of our defense, which is why my organization is the Keystone Defense Initiative, is our nuclear deterrent. We are using nuclear weapons right now. We're using them to deter our adversaries from crossing the nuclear threshold or from launching a massive non-nuclear attack that can have major consequences against us or our interests. And so after the Cold War, we really thought that we had turned a page in history to the point where we didn't need to continue to modernize our nuclear force. We thought that our relations with the Russians were improving. The Chinese had a small nuclear force. I remember, when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House and he went to Taiwan, the Chinese could throw a huge conniption fit about it, but there was not a doggone thing they could do about it because they couldn't hit a carrier. Couldn't even see the carrier. Well, the Chinese didn't just take that anger and just say, okay, we'll just pound sand and go home. They got really busy taking their riches from the global economy and investing it in a military, and then in particular, a nuclear force. So now we're facing not just one nuclear peer, the Russians, like what Ronald Reagan had faced during the Cold War, but for the first time in history, we're going to be facing two nuclear peers, the Chinese and the Russians, which means our nuclear force has to be designed to deter both of them, and not just one at a time, simultaneously. That was one of the findings of the U.S. Strategic Posture Commission. And so our nuclear enterprise has atrophied over the last several decades. The Obama administration agreed to modernize the force we have in exchange for the Senate to ratify and to provide a consent to the Senate to ratify the treaty, the New START treaty with the Russians, because the Obama administration wanted to go down a fewer number of deployed nuclear weapons, but to do that, the Republicans in the Senate said, we're not going to agree to that unless you modernize the nuclear weapons we have. Thankfully, they got busy doing that, but it's not nearly done. And by the way, it was designed just to handle Russia. It was not even conceived of our current nuclear modernization plan to handle China and Russia. And so when you think about the Russian nuclear program, their theater range nuclear weapons, when they're here on TV and thinking of they're brandishing nuclear weapons and threatening to use them, those are their nuclear weapons that can reach inside Europe. They're short-range nuclear weapons. Those aren't even bound by treaty. Those are totally unbound by treaty. They outnumber American short-range nuclear weapons 10-1. The only ones bound by treaty right now are the ones that they can deploy that can reach across our countries. And by the way, the Russians are constantly cheating on treaties. The New START treaty is the last standing treaty that's technically in effect, but the Russians have stopped complying with the verification requirements of the treaty since Ukraine. By February 2026, we're going to be in a world with no treaty that constrains American nuclear weapons or Russian nuclear weapons. And China has never been party to any continental treaty of nuclear weapons. So anyway, one of the findings of the Bipartisan Strategic Posture Commission is, I know this country's got all kinds of problems, but one thing that we really can't afford not to do is to fully modernize a credible nuclear deterrent. It's about 7% of our entire defense budget. Our entire defense budget is about 3.2% of GDP. Our mandatory spending is going way up. Our defense spending, discretionary spending as a percent of GDP has gone down.
And now that you've segued into the percentage of GDP for defense, back in the day of Reagan, we went up to 6%. What do we need to do in the next administration?
So this is, I'm here I am with more bad news. So first let me just say, those who are concerned with the inefficiencies of the Department of Defense, check. I agree with you. For those who would say we don't do contracting well in the Department of Defense, we only have a few big contractors, it's inefficient and we're slow, check. I gotcha. For those who would say we've got military leaders who haven't won a war in a long time and are bad at giving military advice, those bad eggs are there, check. But we still have the best military in the world. I just went out and spent a couple of days out in Kings Bay, Georgia, where we have our submarines. Holy smokes! Has anyone been down there and had a chance to see? But if you want to be completely reinvigorated and optimistic about the next generation of Americans and our military and the kind of men who join our military right now, you look at those enlisted guys operating those submarines. They're 25-year-olds right now operating nuclear submarines. You know that? And they are highly competent, very patriotic, seriously disciplined, sense of camaraderie, fraternity. It's an amazing thing to see. It's amazing. And they deserve the best. And they deserve the best infrastructure of where their basing is. They deserve the best submarines. They deserve submarines, the next generation of submarines that are the quietest in the world so that the Chinese and the Russians never know where they are. They're willing to serve and to protect this country. We're going to make sure that they never, ever go in a fight that's fair. That they always have the overwhelming advantage. And so we're going to have to spend a lot more on our defense. And we got to go fast. We're not in a position now. We have to make some very serious changes. I mean, just like you think about how we haven't been investing in major power war for 4 decades in a serious way. And I mean weapon systems, advanced weapon systems that can take on the Chinese in space, their missile systems, their anti-missile systems, their submarines, all that stuff. But we also need much greater quantities. You're never going to have a gizmo that's going to come along that takes away the need to have lots of missiles. You're never going to have a gizmo that comes along and takes away the need to have the best, biggest Navy in the world. And the Chinese right now, haul, they've got a bigger Navy than ours. And so we're going to need, now, so one cool thing is people say, oh my goodness, Rebecca, it's going to take so long to do this and we're so slow. We can go fast. We've done it fast when there's just a national emergency. Leading up to World War II during the Cold War, we can go fast. Elon Musk is demonstrating what the private sector can do. He's gotten the price of launch down for space launch way down relative to the government, what the government can do and what human ingenuity can do. We can do this. We can leverage private sector to do it. The other thing that's really cool that I saw is when Ukraine needed certain weapon systems badly, they needed this particular type of munition. And we only had an air delivery variant of it, the JDAMs, but they didn't have an Air Force. They couldn't use it. We got a governmental plan. He just went to the Boeing company and he said, hey, can you take this weapon system that you have that we deliver from air and make it a ground variant? So we have a whole bunch of them out in Missouri, make it a ground variant. He gave Boeing the direct acquisition authority, so you didn't have to go through the rigmarole of the Department of Defense. And within 7 weeks, they had a ground-based variant that the Ukrainians needed delivered to Ukraine. In 7 weeks, from Missouri. We can do it. Okay, so we got to go faster, but we're going to have to invest a lot more capital into the Department of Defense to make sure that we can get our warfighters the weapon systems they need.
I got one more. You have one?
I have one.
Okay, cool.
All right, well,
So I can say 6%. I think 6% GDP is probably about right ballpark.
okay, so the high ground is space. And we do have some technology that could be used to defend our country against missile attack if we were to go to space and leverage the technology that we developed 30 years ago. But now, as you say, Elon Musk has the capability to put thousands of vehicles on orbit in a proper way that would give us the missile defense protection we need.
So a lot of you will be familiar with this idea that people are constantly striving for the next thing. We're going to have to figure out this new solution to a major problem. When, in fact, a lot of the time, if not most of the time, if not all the time, other people have already conceived of it, and it's a good idea, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, such as the case with Ronald Reagan and his SDI program. Reagan's notion was, rather than only having offensive weapons to shoot at each other, to deter each other, why not have defensive capabilities to provide your people with some protection so that you're not just mutually vulnerable to one another's destruction? Israel has demonstrated this in real life. The Iron Dome weapon system has enabled Israel to be restrained and to allow decision makers to go on the offensive at their choosing where they want. It gives enormous operational discretion and decision-making time for the leaders. I want the same thing for the United States of America. We have a limited missile defense system right now because George Bush 43 pulled the United States out of the ABM treaty and got us started at building out a homeland missile defense system. But it's a ground-based system, which means it's limited in what it can do. It's designed to intercept the kinds of missiles that a North Korea could shoot at the United States of America. I'm not satisfied with that. I would like my kids to be protected from Chinese and Russian missiles because they're pointed at us. And so in order to do that, in order to make sure it's technically feasible and most cost effective, you gotta go up. You gotta have your vantage point from space. And you have a lot of smart people who have been working on this in the labs, taking the technology that was developed and conceived of during the Cold War, during the height of the Reagan administration. 1983, when Ronald Reagan gave his SDI speech. It's still true today. And so we got to get back at that. Another finding of the Strategic Posture Commission was that we are to the point now where we need to develop defenses against the homeland against the coercive threat from China and Russia. Because China and Russia might think that they can pop off missiles against the U.S. homeland to frighten the American people but not enrage us, is how we talk about it. So that they can take Taiwan, take the Philippines, break up NATO. Now, I think they would be wrong about the American response, but that doesn't mean I don't think that they might actually be confident that it would frighten us and not enrage us. And so what do I want to do? I want to convince them, or at least get it in their head that it might not be successful. And so to do that, I want to increase our defenses. Because then, this is what I said this on Fox when Israel, everyone's like, Israel intercepted all these Iranian missiles. And then they thought, oh good, deterrence is established. And I'm like, oh no, that's just the first part. First, you intercept them, and then you retaliate as though you didn't intercept them. See what I mean? So you intercept them to protect your people and protect your military's response, and then you exact pain on your adversary for doing it so they don't do it again. That reestablishes deterrence. And so that's what I want for the United States of America.
So, Rebecca, I've seen you speak on videos at least about Christianity and national security. And I just wondered if you could tell us what that relationship is about and what it means in the real world.
This is another, we need another 2 hours. It's a really great question, and it's why I'm a contributing editor of Providence magazine, because I think it's important, especially as our country becomes much more secular and anti-Christian, and people have become ill-practiced in thinking about what Christianity actually teaches about statecraft. And my view is that when you think about the laws of armed conflict, for instance, the laws of armed conflict, the way the United States fights wars versus how Russia fights wars, or Hamas, that's a really easy one too. But both Russia and Hamas target what? They target civilians, and why do they do that? They target on purpose civilians to maximize human suffering, to get the other countries to stop. The United States, the laws of armed conflict are based on the principles of discriminating against hard targets, military legitimate targets, and societal targets, people and political innocence, and proportionality, and those are 2 really big ones. And all of the various offshoots of those. So those are 2 really big ones. And that's okay. So that's the law of armed conflicts. That's basically what we look at when we think of international law. Well, who designed that? Who put that together? This is the U.S.-led order. This is the United States of America. This is the influence that we've had. Now, there is no global government that enforces that. The International Criminal Court is a criminal enterprise. This anti-Semitic bunch of folks. We should never hand over our sovereignty to some global institution that has not been elected or held accountable by the American people. But what I am suggesting is that the United States of America take our principles of justice here at home and the ones in which we hold ourselves to whenever we are abroad overseas and hold our allies to account, and then we are true to the principles of what it means to be an American. And guess what? Those are based on Judeo-Christian principles. And so I fully respect those of my friends whose consciences make them pacifists because they're Christians, and that's been a long tradition in the United States. It's not the one that I have. I believe that the duty of a just government is to protect innocent and avenge those who would harm them. Now, I don't mean avenge as in going around the world being a world policeman. I do mean that if you harm the American people, that you are on the receiving end of a punishment so you don't do it again. And I believe that it's perfectly consistent with the just war doctrine. And so it's important that Americans, this is Augustine. This is Augustine, Luther, and Calvin. People think it's only Catholic, but it's had a long ecumenical tradition within Protestantism as well. That we understand that that's what just government is, and so we should hold our government account to that. And that all of us, because we live in a democratic republic, we all are lesser magistrates. We all have a responsibility in our private vocations to make sure that we're holding our elected leaders accountable to make sure they abide by these principles. And so just as the Russians they will be themselves. Russians will act Russian in terms of their government and what they believe to be right and true. The Chinese Communist Party is rooted in Marxist ideology, Marxist-Leninist ideology. We need to know what it means to be American, what American principles are. We need to go all the way back to the founding. And you don't have to be a Christian or a Jew to believe these things either. These are things that have benefited a pluralistic society because we believe that all people are created in the image of God and are endowed with inalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And then by the consent of the governed, we can all live here with security and prosperity. And so those are the principles that I think are still very much salient in American foreign policy. But we're out of practice in thinking about it. So I will occasionally, if something happens in the world, I will write articles through Providence to explain why I think this or that might be in accordance with Christian ideas about right and prudent military objectives.
Great question. Would anyone like to ask a question of Dr. Heinrichs? Wait.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just, I guess, a couple of questions. If you could comment on the future of NATO, what you'd like to see happen, what you think is going to happen. And also, I had a little friend last night tell me that Trump wants to break up NATO. So I just sat there, and then I wanted to ask you about willingness in the military.
Yep.
And also the ships that are 99 miles away in Cuba.
Great. I'll see if I'll go as quickly as I can. So on the first one, I mean, I think that NATO needs to be made stronger. I'm not going to try to tell you what I think Trump will or will not do. And if he were here, he would tell me not to say what he will or will not do either. So I will let him. He's been very adamant that he speaks for himself, and so I'll let him make those decisions. But I will say that when he says that he made NATO stronger whenever he was in office, that is true. That he really pushed our allies to spend more on their defense, that he sought to make Poland stronger, that he was the one that got weapons into Ukraine that President Obama was unwilling to do. All of that is just a matter of historical record. That's true. Now, do we still have countries that are woefully below their commitments? Yeah, lately several members of Congress hosted Speaker Johnson at Hudson on Monday. He picked on Canada, which I thought was delightful. Yeah. All of these countries, we benefit from their security. So I do not look at it like, that this is just sort of a matter of altruism that we do this for them, provide our security. I believe that when they are stronger, we are stronger. But and when they are safe, that's better for the United States. But they really do have to take their economies and invest in their own defense industrial base to be able to put their shoulder to the wheel, just as we need to do too. So I suspect that, my hope is that a second Trump administration would get back to whatever he sought to do in the first administration, which is make NATO stronger. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is we really do have to, I think, shift some of our troops to the front of where I think NATO is now, which is closer to Russia. There's, so I think a reallocation of forces. People say, why does it have to be the United States? I'm telling you, you might wish it wasn't that way, but there is something about a U.S. Marine that instills fear in the adversary in a way that, no offense, but the French just don't do. And my French friends are listening, I think you're very important. No, in all seriousness, there is something, you still, American leadership in Europe is indispensable. I don't care what anybody says. It even means I think we're going to go through an era of, no kidding, serious American delegation to our allies. That we're ready to do the same thing. It's going to take some tough love and some delegation, but U.S. leadership is indispensable. You cannot let, quote, Europe handle Europe. It will fall apart. So that's what I would say there. And then, quote, military. I think that it is imperative that our country is not politicized, that our military is not politicized, that our war fighters that whoever makes a 19-year-old young farmer from Ohio decide to join the military, whatever that is in the military and whatever warrior ethos he has, that should continue to foster that kind of warrior ethos in the military. So if you are creating a military environment that turns that guy away, we're doing the most. Okay? So we need military leaders that gives those 18, 19-year-old farm boys everything they need to go in and to learn and to be disciplined. And, just this idea of like that being intentional about making our military diverse in order to make it strong is so totally backwards. You take a diverse country, we are a diverse country, it's awesome. You take a diverse country like ours with a bunch of young men and women, but mostly still men, who want to join the military, and then you make them a unified fighting force. We literally shave their heads to make them look alike and to be the same. It is the epitome of out of many one. That is what the military is supposed to do. When we start getting that backwards, of course our recruiting numbers are low. Why would anybody who has the fire in their belly to go out and go on an adventure to hop on a submarine for several months under the depths of the ocean hunting our adversary's subs? Why in the world would you want to make it like a Harvard lounge? That guy is not going to sit in a feminist studies Harvard lounge. So I think that we need to do that. Having said that, there is a real danger in pushing too far and saying, because we have some military leaders who have adopted this woke ideology, that therefore we're not going to encourage our sons to join the military. There is an enormous danger in that. So I really want to guard against that. It is still not, is my view, and I've taken a hard look at this, it is not pervasive across the military. You still go in, especially our enlisted guys, and our guys who go in, they are still the best of us. And so what I think we need to do is have political leadership that goes in there and just make sure that all of our leadership at the top of the military understands that what we're doing is we're there to make a fighting force to make sure we protect the American people and that they have the strongest capabilities if they do have to go into conflict.
And this is the last question we have time for today.
Thank you. You brought up the matter of urgency. I just read literally yesterday, they asked Lockheed Martin when they could double the production of a certain missile, and the answer was 2028. It wasn't tomorrow, it wasn't next month, it was 2028.
That takes too long. It's a complicated thing. The answer is multifaceted to this. But one of the biggest problems, and this is an oversimplification, so forgive me, but this comes down to it is a political decision to get this country essentially on a war footing. If you have a guy, the Biden administration wants us to rebuild our military that has atrophied for the last 40 years, but he wants to do it while pretending that climate change is the biggest national threat to this country, you will not do it. you will have contractors that will say, well, I got time because we're worried about the glaciers. And I mean, it seems like that is an oversimplification, but there is a motivation behind this. So it's simply not true that climate change is the #1 national threat to this country. It's not true. So the answers for why it takes so long for some of these guys, there's many reasons. One of them is onerous regulations and restrictions that have to do with climate ideology that we put in place since the Cold War. Some of that has to do with our acquisition strategy. We've gotten really bad, and we haven't been on a war footing because we were mostly worried about Al-Qaeda, and we thought that major power conflict was a thing of the past that we had evolved from. And so if you have political leaders that can drill and drive through the interagency process to say, you will develop these weapon systems. I mean, I keep hearing about how we cannot possibly get Ukraine more 155mm rounds that were just out. There is a facility not far from where I live, a couple hours from where I live. They're only operating like 5 or 6 hours out of the day. Now, okay. That tells me that we have the infrastructure and we actually do have the people, but we're not motivating them to pump out more 155mm rounds. So we're not even squeezing out our full potential and capacity for what we have now, even before we go out and do it. I mean, I always tell them, you want to build that better, you want a big plan that we rebuild it, it should be built back better, our defense industrial base. And go recruit these kids. I mean, we can talk about the border and fentanyl, that's a whole other thing, but there's young Americans that want purpose, and they want American ascendancy, not American decline. So we need workers, we need some American patriotism, confidence that we still are the good guys, and we can go faster. I just don't buy it. It's going to take till 2029 to do this stuff. Then American decline is inevitable, and I just project that. Dr. Heinrichs.
Most of us love living in Collier County. We feel really safe here. But there's something going on with warships in Cuba.
Yeah, so that's the other great question. The bad news is you've got Russian ships near our coasts. But I will say they've been there for a while. So they pop up and we see them and we know they're there. And then you have the military that comes out and says, don't worry, they don't pose a threat to us. So when they say that, when the military comes out and says, don't worry, they do not pose a threat to the United States of America, what they mean by that is, we will not let them pose a threat to us. So it's not that they don't have the capacity or ability to do, they absolutely do. Russian warships near us is very bad. But this is part of why we want to make sure that the Russians are weak and hobbled and hurt and struggling as far away from American shores as possible. If you let the Russian economy continue to hobble along with the help of the Chinese diplomatic and economic help, you don't actually have true sanctions on them, you continue to let them invest, then they're still going to create damage. And everyone thinks it's just Ukraine. Russia is creating problems for the United States all across the planet. So they are an acute, real, no-kidding, chronic threat to the United States. But the United States is still actively deterring them, and we still are tracking them. So whenever they come near us, you do have the American military comes and follows them along and keeps an eye on them, and that keeps them in check, which we're really thankful for. But it's going to take different and serious change, American leadership to make sure that we want to make sure the American people are safe and secure and are at ease here at home. Last thing I'll say too, we also want to be able to know that the world is even relative when we go abroad. Do you know that since President Biden has been in office, 11 American embassies have been evacuated? It's the highest number in the history of the country. Second highest was the Obama administration. So when you think about evacuating embassies, what that means is the United States had a mission there that we were doing something that was helping the fledgling state fight corruption and keep the terrorists at bay. And it became so unsafe for American diplomats wearing the American flag. It became so unsafe for them they had to leave the country. That's American retreat. 11 embassies. So what I want the United States to move in the world on terms favorable to Americans to keep the American people safe, secure, and free. And so I want to see Americans be able to go abroad and be real. I want adversaries to know that if you harm an American, that you're going to be in serious trouble. That if you snatch Americans off the street and hold them in a tunnel in Gaza, that we are coming for you. And we don't have that right now. So I don't want the Russians to feel comfortable with their warships close to American shores. I want them to be uncomfortable or too comfortable.